Great. So you guys must be the people that don't like theme parks or AI, right? Looking at the schedule. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to explore how performance of skills inside a team can affect the flow of value. Now, I've tried really, really hard not to say the words cognitive and load, but that first bit is going to be team cognitive load, okay? So you've had a good explanation from Rachel this morning. Second, we'll look at like the secret sauce or the not so secret sauce to rapid upskilling, okay? And I say not so secret because these techniques are well known. Sometimes it's just about making them coherent and taking that first step. And then finally, I'll look at how we can do that kind of enablement at scale in a really large organization where the enablers are massively outnumbered by the contributors, or maybe your organization where you just don't have any enabling function at all at the moment. Okay, so quick introduction. My name's John. I work for Booking.com as an Agile coach, and we are the largest online travel agency in the world. And chances are that some of you, I guess, may have booked your accommodation for this conference through us. But it would be remiss of me not to talk about our connected trip vision. And there's a lot more to our platform than just accommodation. So we've got flights and taxis and car rentals, and insurance and attractions and cruises, and our fintech division is now becoming really large. So we're starting to take payments and process payments ourselves. So we've got some decent scale going on at Booking.com. And fortunately, or unfortunately for me, I've just been assigned as the Agile coach to what we call Central Tech. And that's the platform that sort of underpins all of these verticals. So I'm really looking forward to learning and exploring more about platform engineering at this conference, okay? I've got a lot to learn. Okay, so that's my day job, but I also, in my spare time around the organization, help steward two communities of practice. One is the community of deliberate technical practice, and the other one is the fast flow community of practice. So, any Agile coaches in the room? Oh, okay, well done for admitting it. The pub's already open, guys. I'm surprised you're in here, okay? So my mum hasn't got a clue what I do. Last time I went home, I think she said it was something like, do you go around to people's desks and check that they're doing enough stretches and getting up enough times? I was like, okay, yeah, that is what I do. So this is like the full spectrum of Agile coaching. And I've spent the last 3 years sort of concentrating on the things to the left of that red line. And what's really nice is at Booking, we've got coaches that go all around this wheelhouse. So I might have other colleagues who concentrate on stuff on the right. So it's actually like we tend to complement each other really well. But I want to just start by talking about that community of practice for fast flow we have at Booking. And that really has been inspired and enabled by this community that's in this building right now. So back in January, we were really lucky to have Erica, can see her over there, and Thomas, who are two team topologies valued practitioners. And they came and practiced team types and team interaction modeling with us. And that really has given us a language at Booking to start reasoning about a future state for our teams where they're humanely organized around the sustainable delivery of fast value. And then a month or so later, or maybe it was in March, I can't remember, I'd had root canal and I was on the ferry, so I wasn't feeling very well. But my spirits were perked up by the Fast Flow conference in the Netherlands, so the sister conference to this. And that's where we found out about Rich Allen's user needs mapping. And I think his book came out this weekend. I've got it in my bag. I haven't seen him. I'm hoping he's going to sign it for me. And that's where we really started to think about, are our teams aligned into what really matters, i.e. users and their needs? And it was also really useful for visualizing some of those sneaky hidden dependencies that can exist in your organization. And finally, right now, we're reading in our book club Suzanne Kaiser's Architecture for Flow. And that's really helped us bring in architects into the conversation and leadership as we start to talk about some of the strategic and tactical patterns from domain-driven design and some of the situational awareness that you get from Wardley mapping. So you might be thinking, what has this got to do with improving teams by deliberate practice? Well, I just wanted to give fair warning. It is probably extremely unlikely that the bottleneck in your system or in your organization is the flow of value inside a team or the efforts that go on inside a team. More likely, it's going to be the interactions between them or the handoffs between them. Something a value stream mapping exercise will probably prove really quickly, and I think that's really valuable if you just take the time to do that. Does anyone recognize this chap? Yes. Goldratt, yeah, this is Eli Goldratt, and he's most famously known for his work on the theory of constraints. Has anyone read the book, The Phoenix Project? Okay, yeah, well, that book was inspired by a book Eli wrote called The Goal, and I highly recommend that. It's in that kind of novel style, format, and there's actually a graphical novel as well, which is really cool. Now, what Goldratt told us was that if we try to make an improvement in a system that's not the bottleneck, then it'll be just a local optimization. It might not improve the system at whole, and it might even degrade the system. So I just wanted to give you that fair warning before we dive inside, upskilling and enabling the flow inside a team. Okay, so let's dive inside. So if we take our two pizza team who are aligned to a flow of value, for them to deliver value-add changes, they need to expend some mental and cognitive energy and time, okay? So I've shamelessly ripped off Ben and Billy's cognitive loadometer from that first Fast Flow conference. And this is, Rachel, I think, gave a reference to this earlier. And so as you may know now from the keynote, we have 3 types of cognitive load: the germane, intrinsic, and extraneous. Now, my definitions are just slightly different to what you may have heard this morning or before, but this is what's helped me land this concept with teams. So the germane. This is us as a team reasoning about the core domain that we steward, okay? So this is us talking at that kind of language of the business problem or the user need and thinking about what do we offer at the moment and what are the new problems we're trying to solve. Now, I've put this in green because this is good cognitive load. This is what Rachel was talking about earlier, where the new theory doesn't even mention germane because it's the good cognitive load. Unfortunately, it gets taken away by the intrinsic and the extraneous. So the intrinsic, now I classify that as everything we need to do to complete the task and get that out to the real world, what we might call the accidental complexity. So this could be like your programming language, your IDE, your ways of working. And then finally, we have the extraneous. And for me, this is everything that we don't have direct control over, right? So if you've got some of those nasty governance rules about getting your value to production, that would be an extraneous load. Things like dependencies are an extraneous load. So let's take a really simple example and try and map these. So let's imagine that our user need or our business problem is finding windmills. So bear with me on this. And then we've decided how we're going to go and find some windmills is we're going to ride a bike. Okay? And our environment are the wonderful streets of Amsterdam. But what happens if you've never ridden a bike before? Now, you guys probably are not going to be able to relate to this because I've heard that common sense are just skills that you forgot that you learned, okay, like crossing the road. But when you can't do something, you've only just found out about a skill, this is what the cognitive load feels like, okay? Riding a bike for the first time, it's like all-encompassing. Like, that's why you crash into things, because you haven't got time to think about your environment. And you certainly haven't got time to think about, well, I'm going to go exploring windmills. Now, in platform engineering, as Rachel alluded to, it's getting more common now for us to know how to offload extraneous cognitive load from teams. So in this case, rather than having this high bandwidth collaboration interaction mode with other street users, other road users and street furniture, the Dutch and the Danish are really good at this, right? We can start to consume cycle highways as a service. But what about the intrinsic cognitive load? Now, this is where our enabling teams come in, our enablers come in. So it's interesting what Rachel said about how her example of the conservation of energy means that we only really get to push cognitive load to other parts of the organization. I think that's definitely true of extraneous cognitive load. We tend to push that to platform teams and platform groups. But our enabling teams, they don't really take on intrinsic load. What they do is they enable it to sort of almost be evaporated away by upskilling, at least until the next rain shower of new skills comes along. So let's look at some effective enablement in action. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of the coaches can identify with some of the behaviour in that clip. So look, no one ever learnt to ride a bike from a book, okay? But you can find this book on Amazon, actually. I'm thinking about adding it to my collection. We learn tacit skills like riding a bike by practicing, but not any type of practice, actually deliberate practice. So if we look what happened in the clip there, Jamie was enabling Roy by, first of all, he's holding the handlebars, right? So that meant he was taking care of the balance, and all Roy needed to do was find his feet on the pedals and then learn to pedal. And then once he'd mastered that skill, he could then think about balancing. And then steering, he could only steer one way and then the other way. And then brakes and gears and so on and so forth. And this is what we call deliberate practice. This is like taking a skill, slicing it up to sub-skills, mastering them individually and putting it back into the whole. And what this does is allow us to really quickly and effectively reduce intrinsic cognitive load or upskill. And you can see that we've got a lot more time to think about finding windmills. And this is what it's like in software engineering. The number of skills that you need to be able to perform at a high level to be a high-performing team is huge, and they tend to be infinitely deep. And they also tend to be changing very rapidly. So it's a bit like learning to ride a bike all over again every few months. We tend to end up with a situation like this in a team. So we've got skills that we're going to need to do, right? New things coming along the line. And then we've got things that we can do. And then we've got things that we've mastered. And we tend to end up with this pile up on the things that we can do, but they just require effort, okay? We haven't mastered them. We need to be really careful, right? Because as new things come along, that can just build up and build up and build up. And if we put our cognitive loadometer onto this, this could mean that our whole cognitive load is just taken up by the fact that we're trying to do skills and they just take a bit of effort to do. And we can map this onto the 4 stages of skill acquisition. And our cognitive load maps quite nicely to this. So at the top left, we have unconscious incompetence. So this is when we just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So you're not very competent because you don't know, you've never seen it, okay? Next thing is you become aware of the skill, but you can't do it. Then you're aware of the skill and you can do it, and it's that taking effort. And then finally, you've mastered the skill. It's become reliable and automatic, okay? It's like getting up in the morning and having a cup of tea, crossing the road, or riding a bike if you know how to ride a bike. So what we really want to be able to do, really, if you think about it, is avoid getting that pile up on B to begin with. So what we need is some kind of magical, go straight to mastery, do not pass consciousness card. And at Booking, this is our secret sauce that's not secret, okay? We take these 2 methods or ways of working, and one is a learning hour, and that's our construct for deliberate practice. And the other thing is ensemble working or ensemble programming. And that's our way that we optimize for practicing and optimize for learning. And I put Emily's book here because she was the first person to formalize this in what she calls the SAMA method. She's part of Dave Farley's Modern Software Engineering channel now, and she's got her own channel in her own right on YouTube. I highly recommend checking it out. So what is a learning hour? A learning hour is composed of the 4 C's, and this comes from Sharon Bowman's very famous book called Training from the Back of the Room, which talks about how you should never stand at the front of the room and lecture. So the irony's not lost on me, but I promise your bit's coming in a minute. So the first C is the connect. This is about getting people together into the right headspace, putting down their phones and their other types of cognitive load, ready to learn a new skill. The second C is the concept. So this is where they learn about the new thing, the new skill. It gets introduced. The next C is concrete practice. Now, this should be the bulk of the learning hour because it's the actual deliberate practice and the practicing part. And the final C is conclusion. And this is that bit where we fuse in that sub-skill into our existing skill. And we can map this onto our skill acquisition map. So when we come in the room, we might be aware of the learning objectives, but they don't really push us forward, okay, in the skill we're going to learn. Then the educator or the coach might give us that delivery, give us that front of the room to give us those concepts, and we become aware of those skills. Then we practice, and we reach conscious competence. We can do the thing, but it requires effort. And then by the end of the session, we've reached mastery. What do you reckon? Can you master a skill in just under an hour? So you guys are going to have a go at this, right? And we haven't got an hour. We've probably got about under 5 minutes, okay? So you guys are going to become experts in telling the difference between a house sparrow and a song sparrow. Okay? Now, the way this works is that you need to try to fail, not fail to try, okay? And you have to say it out loud, okay? There's something that happens when you actually say something out loud. So let's have a practice, okay? So after 3, 1, 2, 3, house. Excellent, okay? After 3, 1, 2, 3, song. Excellent, okay. Off we go. Okay, give yourselves a round of applause. What's this? What's this? Excellent, you guys have mastered it. Okay, so I'm really sorry about that. I forgot to tell you that once you master a skill, it's really, really difficult to unlearn. You'll have to come back next year if they have me to learn about how to unlearn. But look, treat it as a gift, right? You can impress your friends and loved ones in the park by shouting out house or song and try not to get arrested. Okay, so back in the software engineering world, like, what is the point of like learning something in just 3 or 5 minutes? Well, sometimes starting a conversation is the most important step. But there are actually some things in software engineering, especially in programming, that are that kind of binary classification. If we think about code smells, okay, I can do a sparrow deck on a code smell, and I don't have to understand some of the things that Dave was talking about how being good at code smells or having patterns rather than anti-patterns helps me manage complexity. Sometimes it's just good for me to be able to recognize what's good or bad, okay? I've put a link in here, the QR code. This is a legendary technical coach called Llewellyn Falco created these Sparrow decks, and there's like at least 20 of them on his blog. I highly recommend checking them out just to start the conversation. On the flip side, if you try and design a learning hour and there's too much to learn, the participants are not going to master the technique, okay? So the heuristic we have at booking is if you've done 3 sessions, 3 learning hours, and the participants aren't mastering the skill, that's the signal to start slicing, because half a skill is always going to beat a half-assed skill, okay? Because we're moving from that pile-up. Okay, our second construct is ensemble programming, ensemble working. So you all just did this, right? I don't think you realised, but those of you who spoke out loud, like you made it safe to be wrong about knowing whether a sparrow is a house or a song sparrow, okay? So you created that kind of psychologically safe environment, and then I heard other people join in the chorus quicker, okay? And that's a really important thing. In a team, we tend to exchange vulnerability for trust, and the quicker we can do that and admit in front of each other that we don't know about something yet, the better. I highly recommend the first learning hour you do be on the skill of doing ensemble programming, ensemble working. And there's some key enabling constraints that you need for that to be effective. I see lots and lots of like anti-patterns in mobbing, and I regard pairing as an anti-pattern in itself. I haven't got time to talk about it now, but come and find me and I'll tell you why. So in effective ensemble programming, you have 3 roles. We have the designated navigator. That's the person who's articulating, okay? They're speaking out loud what they're thinking and talking about the implementation. That comes out of their mouth and into the driver's ears. The driver's the person who's controlling the computer, okay? But they're not making any decisions, okay? They're just listening to the designated navigator's instructions and basically acting like an intelligent input device. The third role, and this is the role that gets missed a lot, right, is the navigators, right? And so if the designated navigator is practicing thinking and articulating about the problem, and the driver's practicing interacting with the IDE and the code, what do you think the navigators are practicing? I heard someone say it. Shutting the hell up, yeah? So we've probably all had people in our team, or maybe we've done it ourselves. We've got those people who kind of like can't shut up, right? They want to always, get carried away and do the solution. And it's really important for them to not what we call steal the learning, okay? So that role is passive, but can be called upon at any time by the designated navigator. So if we map our cognitive loadometer onto these individual roles, something really interesting emerges about what makes ensemble programming sustainable. So the designated navigator, I admit, they're sort of got the same type of cognitive load as if you're working solo, okay? They're sort of holding the domain in their head and they're managing the complexity and thinking about the computer program. The navigators, that's a different mix, right? Because they're not having to actively direct what's going on, okay? Unless called upon. So there's a slight different mix of cognitive load there. What do we think about the driver? What's their cognitive load look like? Anyone?
Intrinsic and extrinsic.
Well, actually, and I'm sorry the emoji's so small, it's a tea break, right? It's coffee. And the reason for this, so it's a rest position, okay? And the reason for this is that we only talk at the level of abstraction that the driver has mastered. So if I've got an expert programmer, I could just be the product manager sitting as the designated navigator and just talking in the language of the domain, okay? Because that person's expert enough to encode that and manage the complexity. Or I could bring someone in off the street who's never done Java, and I could suddenly start talking at the abstraction of like type S, type T, type R, type I, type N, type G. But I don't have to do that again, right? I've known many, many people who have come into a mob and within a day have learnt a new programming language. Key enabling constraint is we switch these roles on a timer. And it might seem counterintuitive, but the better you get at mob programming, that's when you can increase the timer, okay? Or maybe go to the cadence of a TDD cycle. If you're not getting on with mob programming, you need to reduce that timer. I've had it down at like 30 seconds before. And I haven't got time to go into this much, but if ensemble programming makes practice really effective, goodness me, in terms of lean flow efficiency, it makes performance really, really effective. It basically enables continuous code review, trunk-based development. It means we can start working in very, very small batches. I've had teams who start mob programming who are at DORA Elite if they've got a half-decent pipe and test suite, just merely from the fact that they're delivering multiple times an hour. Okay, I promised I would talk about scale, and I haven't got long. So, Booking.com's a big organization, and if this is each one of these little blobs is a two-pizza team, then we don't have many enablers to go round, okay? And what that means is that some of the impact of this enablement is really deep, right? I said we've had some really high-performing teams turn around, but it's not very wide. So we had to come up with a way of scaling this. And so we created what was called a train the trainer scheme. And this was like training people in enablement. And so we've rebadged it now with a better language since we started getting into team topology. So now we call it enabling the enablers. What this meant is we took people from each team and we asked, would you like to enable your team? And then we gave them the tools to do so. And so first of all, we put this scaffolding around a learning hour. It's really important to do a needs assessment on the team. What are the skills missing? What do they need to improve upon? And you can do this in a very direct way with a team, or you can do it a scaled way by looking at some of the other data you might collect in the organization. At Booking, we use GetDX for like developer experience qualitative feedback, and we collect the DORA metrics for each team. And you can get some pretty good insights working backwards about what capabilities might need improving. The second is that we teach the enablers how to set clear learning objectives. So this might be using words from Bloom's taxonomy like define, recognize, identify, all the things you guys can do now with sparrows. The next thing is we introduce them to concept mapping. If you play football or any sport, and someone asks you, for instance, if you're a footballer, what makes a good penalty, it can be really difficult to articulate that, but you can do it. A concept map helps you like draw out some of those skills and draw out some of those sub-skills when you want to do some slicing. We teach them some basic pedagogy about how to do a formative assessment when you're enabling someone in learning hour. We need to check that the participants are moving along with us. Otherwise, we need to pivot. You know, arguably, this is the skill of a coach, right? The skill of an educator. Then at the end, we need to reference back to our learning objectives and check objectively, have they learnt this, okay? I'm pretty confident that you, all you guys now can tell the difference between a song and a house sparrow, because I sort of tested you at the end. And then last but certainly not least, almost most important, sometimes we can forget to put what we practice back into performance, okay? So it's really, really important we do that. And communities of practice are absolute table stakes in enablement. I think Emily Webber is here, like she's going to be doing a talk tomorrow, and I would really, really encourage you to go to that. We created a community of practice that really allowed us to join up all these enablers across business units, you know, fintech, flights, taxis. They've got nothing to do with each other normally, but we made these connections. So, key takeaways. First, grasp the current condition, and please, please, please do a value stream mapping exercise, okay? Just to make sure that you're not going to end up 10xing a team that just ends up shoving a load of inventory at your bottleneck, okay? Next, assess the cognitive load of the team in an individual or a scaled way. Next thing is make time for deliberate practice. We're a very weird profession, like we don't practice much. You think about a football team, they practice well more than they perform, okay? And that goes for a lot of other professions. Put the practice back into performance, okay? So if you're doing learning hours or doing training in your team, if you come across a problem, make sure that you say, remember the learning hour. And then finally, we can accelerate the enablement by creating the community of practice and building that scaffolding. Thank you, and happy finding windmills.